There are three major nesting colonies of the leatherback sea turtle in the world. One that nests across the borders of French Guiana and Suriname, one that nests on the west coast of Africa, and Trinidad. So, Trinidad supports more than 30% of all nesting leatherbacks in the entire world. This one island. Does that mean that Trinidadians have a responsibility to protect and support and nurture this population? I think it does. I think when you are fortunate to have something as incredible as this amazing resource, as this amazing animal in your territory, that you then adopt that responsibility for taking care of that animal while it's there.
Community conservation began in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when the Forestry Division recognized that turtle protection wanted foot patrol on the beach, and that is when, under Dr. Carol James, three key communities and three index beaches were identified, which is Matura, Fishing Pond, and Grand River. That was so successful that it created a ripple effect, and now there are 17 communities across Trinidad that are involved in the protection of turtles.
The new 2011 regulations, like the 1952 and 1975 regulations before, prohibit the capturing and or killing of sea turtles on land or at sea, as well as the taking and or sale of turtle meat and or turtle eggs. However, by way of improvement, these prohibitions, according to the new Regulation 3, are now enforced at all times. Therefore, under the 2011 regulations, sea turtles are now afforded year-round protection at sea and on land in Trinidad and Tobago.
The primary issue associated with the killing of turtles in these gill nets we call bycatch. And this bycatch is so significant that it represents as many as 10% of the turtles that nest here being killed every single year.
The population of sea turtles that are known in the Atlantic is now the largest population that we have within the world, and the population that nests in Trinidad is the largest for the entire insular Caribbean. If we have a sea turtle bycatch and the level that's being incurred at this moment, you would probably be heading towards a population collapse.
From next month, March to May, this is fisherman harvest. Plenty carried, especially carried. Not too much kingfish, but carried. When the rain start to fall, we catch plenty carried. And that is the time the turtles does come to nest. And the turtles will be on, carried does be on the shore, the leatherback turtle does be right in front of the nesting areas. So they just catching in the net.
In Trinidad and Tobago, especially in Trinidad, sea turtle bycatch definitely is a problem to gillnet fishermen. The problem that it causes is that because the animal is so large, it does a lot of damage to the gillnets, physical damage, that the gillnets have to be repaired, taken out of use and repaired. So the effect is that the fisherman incurs a loss of being able to do his livelihood. Sea turtle bycatch also incurs loss of ecotourism opportunities for these coastal community groups, as well as a loss to biodiversity because we're losing leatherback sea turtles out of the population.
Sea turtle bycatch is a particularly insidious conservation problem because it affects juveniles, adult females, adult males, and both reproductive and non-reproductive animals. And so when turtles are caught and killed in fishing gear, they're attacking the entire population. They're not just attacking eggs, they're not just attacking hatchlings, they're attacking, and often the part of the population they're attacking is the most sensitive. It's often these big animals that have survived for 25 or 30 or more years and are just starting to reproduce. And so from an ecologist perspective, we think about animals producing as a matter of paying back the population. So think about it this way. When a leatherback sea turtle lives for 30 years, we believe that only about 1 in 1,000 eggs survive up to that adult size. So if you think about each adult turtle representing 1,000 eggs, she can't produce 1,000 eggs until she's reproduced for a number of years. And so if she hasn't started reproducing yet, and you kill her, you've wasted the equivalent of 1,000 eggs on a beach. And so those kind of impacts that occur when you catch and kill large adult turtles mean that the population will never survive. One of the things ecologists have learned about the biology of sea turtles is that the most valuable turtles in the population are those large turtles that are just about mature but not started reproducing yet. And models that have been done by ecologists looking at this have shown that if you don't protect that life stage of a turtle, these adults and these subadults, there's no amount of conservation on a nesting beach that will ever save that turtle population. So, when we have bycatch killing adult females, or adult males, it's killing the part of the population that means you can't save the population unless you stop that mortality source. We could protect every single nesting beach, we could protect every single egg on the beach, we could protect every single female on the beach, but when bycatch is still going on, the sea turtle population will still decline to extinction.
In 2014, the Environmental Management Authority, by notices, all dated March 18, 2014, designated 5 species of sea turtles nesting on the various beaches of Trinidad and Tobago as environmentally sensitive species. The protection given to the various sea turtles as stated under Part 3 of the 5 notices is the same for all species. The said Part 3 protection covers the matters addressed under the Protection of Turtle and Turtle Eggs Amendment Regulations 2011, with a few more prohibited activities expressly stated therein. For example, Part 3B of the said notices say that the deliberate or reckless capture or endangerment of the environmentally sensitive species through the setting of nets or other fishing activities is prohibited. Part 3C of the said notices say that the deliberate or reckless capture of the environmentally sensitive species in commercial shrimp trawler nets is prohibited. Part 3D of the said notices say, in part, that the use of any device that may harm or impact negatively upon the environmentally sensitive species by, for example, impairing its sight, hearing, or ability to swim is prohibited. Under Section 72 of the Environmental Management Act 2000, any person who knowingly or recklessly undertakes or conspires to allow any activity with respect to an environmentally sensitive species designated under Section 41 of the said Act, and which may have an adverse impact on such species, commits an offense and is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine of $100,000 or imprisonment for 2 years.
The most leatherback turtle that I had ever caught in one night, with a set minute twice in that one night. In one catch, which was the first half of the night, a whole 27 turtle, leatherback turtle. And in the second half of the night, a whole 11. So it's 38 leatherback turtle for the night.
In one night, I catch at least 12 turtles.
And how many of them died?
At least 3 died. Not at least, 3 died. I could remember that. 3 died.
On the Pacific coast of Mexico in 1980, the number of leatherbacks that were nesting on that coast was measured. It was estimated that somewhere between 50 and 75,000 female turtles were nesting on that coast, and these were all leatherbacks in the early 1980s. Today, there are less than 200. And I'm not talking 200,000 or 250, I'm talking there's less than 200 females nesting. So in that population, we saw the largest decline and the most rapid decline of any large marine animal in the world that's ever been recorded in history. It went from somewhere around 75,000 females to 200 females between 1980 and about 2006. The reason that that happened is that off the coasts of South America, the Peruvian and Chileans introduced a type of new fishing net that was called gill net fishing. And this was oceanic gill net fishing going on off the coast. Sounds familiar. It's the same sort of gill netting that we do here. It's a drift gill net. In those early years, the fishing effort increased dramatically. So you had just a few fishermen starting, but more and more fishermen started using these kind of nets. And every year, each fisherman would kill, 2 or 3 turtles, maybe 4 or 5 turtles. The fishermen themselves didn't see that as a problem. 4 or 5 turtles, they would ask us, well, where's the problem there? I only killed 4 or 5 turtles in that year. Until you multiplied that by the number of fishermen that were fishing in that fleet. And it turns out that they were probably killing somewhere between 10 and 20,000 leatherbacks a year. So it took a population that was very robust, very strong, and the largest in the world, and in a matter of about 20 years, destroyed the population. We're seeing a similar thing here. 10% of the leatherbacks are killed every year in coastal gill nets. The fishermen say to me here the same thing they say there. Well, we only caught 20 last year, or we only caught 15 last year, and only half of those were drowned, or only 30% of those were drowned. But when you multiply those numbers by every fisherman that's out there, and every fisherman that is accidentally catching leatherback sea turtles, you can begin to imagine the scenario that really frightens us about the future of leatherback populations here in Trinidad.
There were scientific studies done subsequent to mine in 2006 that showed that the numbers are indeed declining, and that it also seems to mirror what has occurred in the Pacific Ocean.
We first started looking at these populations really in the 1960s. There's some data from the Field Naturalist Club back in as far back as 1969. And the numbers, and I've reviewed all these and I've studied these fairly carefully. And in the early 60s up through the early 1990s, every year there was about the same number of turtles nesting on the beach. It would be a little hard to make a prediction of what that looked like, but it was probably around 1,000 to 2,000 leatherbacks were nesting here in Matura during that time period. During the era of the 1990s, the populations in Trinidad and throughout the Caribbean region and the Atlantic Ocean began to grow very, very quickly. We think this was coupled very closely to increases in jellyfish populations in the North Atlantic. And essentially what was happening was more food was becoming available for the turtles in the Atlantic Ocean. Plus, we had conservation efforts beginning throughout the region to start protecting turtles on the beaches. So that helped increase the numbers of turtles that were coming in, and they rose very, very quickly. By the mid-2000s, the turtle populations here in Trinidad stabilized and then began to decline. And so we've seen a decline for about the last 6 years to the level they are back down to where they were in the early 1990s, and probably where they were as long ago as the 1960s. So our turtle populations have risen quickly through the 90s and then declined. The reason for that rise was conservation work, but it was also because the feeding grounds that these turtles rely on to grow and to produce eggs were getting better and better and better in the Atlantic Ocean. Those feeding grounds have seemed to decline now, so we're seeing a decline in the amount of turtles being produced on the beaches, and we're seeing in the ocean less food available for them. So now there's not so many turtles out there to come in and start nesting. So those two things are working in concert. Now, what's the hallmark sign that the problem is exclusive to Trinidad is that the populations in the North Caribbean, those on St. Croix and the U.S. Virgin Islands and those in Puerto Rico, have not begun to decline. They are staying stable. So even though the food is less for them, their populations are staying stable, which means that they have a strong, healthy population supporting them. Here in Trinidad, ours have begun to decline, and I believe the reason for that is because we're killing so many of the females offshore that there's nothing left to come back into the population for later. So we have this very challenging situation, and really it is associated here only in Trinidad with our gillnet capture.
In light of the above, the continuing problem of significant sea turtle capture and death, the so-called bycatch problem, would seem to suggest that our fisherfolk are breaking the existing laws with impunity, and therefore the solution would be better law enforcement. However, the tenor of the existing legislation and regulatory framework suggests, in my respectful view, that what is being legislated against is the deliberate and or reckless capture, killing, and use of sea turtles and their products. This does not really address the so-called bycatch problem, which is characterized by the inadvertent capture of sea turtles in the nets of our fisherfolk as they go about earning their living to provide for themselves and their families. In other words, fisherfolk in the course of their legitimate profession cast nets to catch fish in Trinidad and Tobago waters all year round, which they are lawfully entitled to do. They do not cast their nets to catch sea turtles. In fact, sea turtles damage their nets and cause them heavy repair and replacement costs.
Just by a turtle entering your net, it immediately starts to damage your net because it would fight and struggle in the net, and the flippers would rip the net immediately. And why is it remaining? The longer it stays in the net, it will eventually tie up more. It does roll in the net and eventually have a big ball. So when you, the fisherman, reach that turtle, in order to remove it, you must cut it out, because it's a large creature. You can't lift it and turn it as you would like to, but you must make an exit point for it. And so that is one of the problems you would encounter. Your net will be damaged.
The type of gill nets that are used here, there's a couple of different kinds of gill nets used for fishing in Trinidad. Both of them will drown turtles, unfortunately. One of those is called a surface drift gill net. The local fishermen call them green web nets. They're used to fish at night because they're green, and so they blend in at night in the dark better than they do in the daytime. They're targeting mackerel species. Sierra mackerel, kingfish, carite are the target species that they use for those kinds of nets. When a turtle encounters a net like that, it is unable to back up. Leatherbacks don't have a reverse gear. They only know how to swim forward because they're used to living in the open ocean. So when a turtle encounters a net like that, their first reaction is to try to push the net out of their way. So they'll take a flipper and they'll pull the net down. But unfortunately, when they do that, it wraps it underneath one of their flippers. So they pull it with the other flipper. And if the effect is that they take the net and they wrap it around their neck and around their flippers, and they become more and more and more entangled until they can entangle into as much as 100 meters or more of net in a big ball wrapped around them till the point is reached that they either can't swim or they can't get themselves to the surface and they drown.
But it's also a risk to fishermen as well to have to take out a leatherback turtle that is alive because it's thrashing around. Okay? So you have a lot of instances where, in order to subdue the animal, flippers may be cut off, the animal may be killed in order for the fisherman to be able to get the turtle out of the net. And a lot of times it's not just one turtle.
The other problem that you would have is in trying to release a leatherback turtle. A leatherback turtle is basically one of the strongest turtle you would reach in the water. It's a formidable opponent, I should say, because you can't just hold it down like that. It's a major struggle to release a leatherback turtle, especially one that in prime, not too long, stick in your net. You ain't struggle around that much. It could take you 15 minutes, half an hour sometimes to release one. And the danger with that is if you get in the way of the fin, the flipper, because he just be trying to get himself out of the net as well. So while he trying to flap it and he flippers and trying to get out of there, you happen to be in the parts of that. It have fellas who get knocked out There were instances where a guy in Sally Bay some long years ago had his hand broken in 6 places from one of those leatherback turtles. So it's like a threat to you in a sense to deal with one of these creatures in the water.
This kind of accidental capture and killing, however, could hardly be seen as deliberate and reckless, and as such would hardly attract liability under the existing laws mentioned above. Quite often, dead sea turtles are found washed up on shores of nesting and other coastal areas with no trace of a potential perpetrator in sight, so that in many instances it would be difficult to even find a perpetrator in the first place. However, even if fisherfolk are caught with dead turtles entangled in their nets, that may only constitute one part of the offense, namely the actus reus or guilty act. However, to incur liability under the regulations and notices, fisherfolk must also have the mens rea or guilty mind. That is to say, it must be shown that they deliberately set out to capture and kill or endanger sea turtles or were reckless in so doing. That would be difficult to prove in the context of legitimate fishing. In other words, fisherfolk plying their legitimate trade in the waters in and around Trinidad and Tobago using gill nets that are not outlawed and fishing in Trinidad and Tobago waters that are not declared no-fishing zones could hardly be caught by the existing legislation if they, during their lawful fishing activity, happen to accidentally capture sea turtles in their fishing nets, resulting in the death of the said turtles.
Long ago, we used to catch leatherback turtle from February month. You would start to see them early February in the water. You would start to catch them in the net from late February. So mostly when they start to come closer to the shoreline, you would start to catch them in the net. Until the month of June to July for the latest. But now you just catch leatherback turtle from December straight into September. The month that there's whole leatherback turtle, the heaviest would be in April, May and June. Those 3 months.
That is the time you catch a whole lot of turtle in the net. Anywhere you put your net in the sea, anywhere you put your net in the sea, you're entitled to catching the length of your net, more turtles you hold.
My prediction is that if the mortality associated with coastal gill nets, particularly the drift gill nets, but also the bottom fishing nets that are used here very commonly, if that problem is not solved, the leatherback sea turtle will not survive Trinidad to the next generation. So that means maybe within 50 years, maybe as little as 40 years, we won't have leatherbacks in Trinidad anymore. And I think that our scientific data that we've gathered for more than 20 years supports that conclusion very, very strongly.
The existing legal and regulatory framework could hardly solve the bycatch problem, even if there is adequate enforcement of the said laws. Therefore, in my respectful view, the problem is unfortunately likely to continue unabated.
The good news is that we don't need to lose the leatherback here, and we don't need to continue to have fishermen's nets destroyed by turtles. There are solutions, and over the last 10 years we've been developing those solutions. Working with the Fisheries Department at first and continuing on after that collaboration. We brought in outside experts. We've developed new kinds of gear that will fish for turtles much better, using the same nets that they use, but modifying those nets in a way that bring them the same amount of income, the same amount of fish catch, but don't catch turtles, or at least reduce the number of turtles caught by about 50%, and it can reduce the mortality of those turtles by as much as 100%. We've also introduced new kinds of fishing to Trinidad fishermen, where they use lines instead of nets, and we've proven with very rigorous scientific data that the kinds of gear that we use will not reduce their income at all. Their income will stay the same, and in some cases their income will improve, and the fish quality that they're catching will also improve. So the solutions are out there. Their solutions are available. To Trinidadians, the leatherback sea turtle represents a resource, and it represents quite a strong financial resource. The number of tourists that come to see leatherback sea turtles nesting in Trinidad exceeds 30,000 per year. between the two colonies of Grand Rivera in the north and Matura here on the east. It's a very significant animal because nobody else has them. When you come to Trinidad, it is one of the few places in the world where you can come to Trinidad and you are guaranteed to see a leatherback sea turtle nesting on the beach. You are guaranteed to see a living dinosaur. And there are very few places in the world where you can actually say that. So Trinidad has this magic resource. It has a responsibility for caring for it, but it also can benefit from it.
It's one thing if you know, if you don't know something is happening and don't do anything about it. It's a more serious thing if you know something is happening and you still don't do anything about it. And that's the situation that we are right now. Entities, agencies should be working together to try and come to a solution. It's a man-made problem. People can fix it.